It was a busy evening at the airport with hundreds of people rushing to catch their flights. Barron Trump, now a young man, stood in the crowded terminal, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look older than his 18 years. He had been traveling for business, something his father had insisted he get involved in, but Barron had other plans. He had learned to observe the world quietly, to notice the details others might overlook. As he stood near the boarding gate, waiting for his flight to board, he noticed an older man struggling with his luggage. The man looked worn out, his clothes frayed and his eyes clouded with a story Barron could only guess. The veteran's hands trembled as he tried to load his bag into the overhead compartment. His cap, worn and faded, read U.S. Army. Barron's gaze lingered. Something about the man's quiet determination struck him. Without thinking, Barron stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," Barron said, his voice calm, though there was something behind it, something more than just kindness. The veteran looked up, surprised, his weathered face breaking into a soft smile. "Thank you, son," he replied, his voice low and raspy, as if the years had taken their toll not just on his body, but on his spirit as well. As Barron took the bag, he couldn't help but notice the veteran's eyes, their weariness, their story. Something gnawed at him. He had been taught to look for opportunities in the world, to find ways to be of service. But here, in this moment, there was something deeper than business or even ambition. It was an awareness of the lives that came before him, those who had fought for a future, who had lived through things Barron could never understand. When it was time to board, Barron entered the first-class cabin, but his mind kept drifting back to the man in the terminal. His seat, at the very front, felt wrong somehow. How could he sit comfortably when the veteran had struggled just to get on the plane? Without thinking, he stood up, scanning the cabin. He spotted the veteran in the crowd, still moving slowly, still fighting against age and pain. The decision hit Barron like a bolt. He walked to the veteran, who was still looking for his seat. "Excuse me, sir," Barron said, catching the man's attention. "I'd like to give you my seat." The veteran looked at him in confusion, his brow furrowing. "Your seat? But that's first class." Barron nodded, his gaze steady. "You've earned it." The veteran hesitated for a moment before accepting, his hand shaking as he placed his bag on the seat. Barron didn't mind. He smiled and watched the man settle in, finally taking a moment to relax, as if the weight of his past had lifted, even just for a moment. But as Barron made his way to the back of the plane, where the economy section was located, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why had he felt so compelled to do this? Was it out of kindness? Or something deeper? He sat down in his new seat, his thoughts racing. As the plane took off, Barron tried to distract himself with his phone, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The flight attendant came over with a small smile. "Excuse me, sir. There's a message for you from the captain. He wants to speak with you." Barron raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to make of this. The captain? Why? His heart skipped a beat as he made his way to the cockpit. The captain was waiting there, along with 2 other crew members, all wearing serious expressions. "Barron, we've been informed about your generous gesture," the captain began, his voice low and steady. "But there's something you need to know. That veteran, he isn't just any ordinary man. He's a war hero, and he's been keeping a secret for years." Barron blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The captain hesitated for a moment as if weighing his words. "That man, the one you gave your seat to, he's been secretly funding a number of charitable projects that have changed countless lives, but he's done it under a false identity, and now he's in danger of being exposed." Barron's heart raced. What kind of danger? Because of the work he's been doing, work that's been counteracting certain political interests, there are people who want him silenced. The captain continued, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know who you've just helped, Barron. What you've done is more significant than you realize." Barron stood there, stunned. His simple act of kindness had just become the beginning of something much bigger, something he couldn't yet understand. The veteran, who seemed so unremarkable, was involved in something that could change the course of history. Barron felt a chill run down his spine, but before he could ask any more questions, the captain spoke again. "Whatever happens next, don't let anyone tell you that your actions were insignificant. You've done something far more important than you know. We'll protect him, but you might be dragged into something much bigger than you can imagine." Barron nodded, a heavy weight settling on his chest. He returned to his seat, staring out of the window, the world below him suddenly seeming much more complicated. The veteran's secret had just become his secret too, and now he had a choice to make, whether to walk away or get involved in a fight that would test everything he believed in. But one thing was clear: nothing in his life would ever be the same again. As the flight continued, Barron couldn't shake the unease that clung to him. His mind raced with the captain's words. The veteran, a hero? A man whose actions had quietly changed lives, now thrust into danger. Barron's thoughts spiraled, and with each passing minute, the weight of what had happened grew heavier. He had given up a seat without thinking twice, a simple act of kindness, but now, it seemed, that gesture had set something much larger into motion. When the plane finally landed, Barron couldn't just walk away. His curiosity, his sense of responsibility, tugged at him. He knew something had to be done, but he had no idea where to start. He had no experience in situations like this. His life had been filled with privilege, decisions made for him, opportunities handed to him. But now he found himself in the middle of a political storm, one that seemed to be brewing around a man who had barely spoken a word to him. As he disembarked, Barron noticed the veteran in the terminal, sitting alone on a bench, his eyes scanning the crowd with a watchful intensity. The man looked like he had been through a lifetime of battles, both external and internal. Barron hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but something urged him forward. "Sir?" Barron's voice was tentative as he approached the bench. The veteran's eyes flicked up to meet his, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "You don't need to thank me," Barron said, unsure of how to explain the urgency that gripped him. "But I need to know more. About you. About what's really going on." The veteran's face tightened. "Kid, you don't know what you're asking." Barron sat down beside him, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "I do know," he said quietly. "I gave up my seat because it felt right. But now, I'm involved in something bigger than I can understand. I need to know what I've stepped into." The veteran sighed, rubbing his weathered hands together as if gathering the strength to speak. "You've got a lot of questions, but the answers aren't simple. And getting those answers could cost you more than you're willing to pay." Barron leaned in, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I don't care about the cost. I care about the truth." The veteran looked at him for a long moment, sizing him up. Then, with a resigned nod, he spoke. "My name is Jack O'Connor. I've spent the last 15 years working under a false identity to fund and protect initiatives that some powerful people want erased. I've been helping communities, veterans, refugees, activists, all while staying off the radar. But now, someone's on my trail. Someone who will stop at nothing to make sure I don't keep going." Barron's heart pounded. "Who's after you?" Jack looked around cautiously before leaning closer. "It's not just one person. It's a network. People in power. People who control the flow of money and information. And they don't like what I've been doing. If they find out who I really am, it could all unravel." Barron felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was no longer just about helping someone. It was about standing up to an unseen force, one that had the power to destroy lives. His life. "But why me?" Barron asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you take my seat?" Jack's eyes locked onto his, and Barron saw something there, a mix of appreciation and caution. "Because I knew you were different. People like you. They're easy targets. They live in a bubble, unaware of the world outside. But you looked at me. You saw me. And for a moment, you didn't just see a vet. You saw a man who needed help. You didn't know it, but you've already chosen to be a part of something bigger. Barron shook his head, trying to process it all. I didn't choose this. I just wanted to do the right thing. Jack smiled faintly. That's the thing about the right thing. It doesn't always come with a choice. Barron stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a bystander. He was in the middle of something he hadn't asked for, but now couldn't ignore. Jack's words echoed in his mind. You've already chosen to be a part of something bigger. The airport seemed quieter now, as if the noise of the world outside had faded into the background. Barron felt a shift within him, a pull to act, to make a difference, even if he didn't fully understand what that meant. The truth, the real truth, was out there, and it was more complicated, more dangerous than he had ever imagined. As Barron turned to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The message was simple. Stay close to him. You've been warned. Barron's heart skipped a beat. The warning was clear. Whatever this was, it had already started, and there was no going back now. Barron walked out of the terminal, the weight of the message heavy in his hand. The quiet hum of the airport seemed distant now, a backdrop to the storm brewing inside him. He had always lived a life of privilege where the biggest challenges were business meetings or family expectations. But now, he was caught in something far more dangerous, something that could destroy not just his reputation, but his very sense of self. He glanced over at Jack, who was still sitting quietly on the bench, watching him with a knowing look in his eyes. Barron took a deep breath and turned to face him. "What's the next step?" he asked, his voice steady, though his mind was a whirlwind. Jack stood slowly, his body language still carrying the weight of years of hardship. "There's no next step yet. First, you need to understand what you're really up against. And trust me, it's not just a few shady politicians. This is bigger than you think. If you want to help, if you really want to be a part of this, you need to be ready for the consequences." Barron nodded, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his head. "I'm ready." Jack looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of skepticism and something else. Maybe hope, or maybe the kind of admiration a soldier would have for someone stepping into the battlefield. "You might think you're ready, but until you see what's really out there, you won't know the full cost." They began walking toward the parking lot, the sounds of the airport fading behind them. Barron's phone buzzed again, and this time it was an email, a cryptic message with an attachment. The subject line read, "The man behind the curtain." Barron's pulse quickened. He opened the email and clicked on the link. The attachment contained a series of photos, some blurry, some clear. They were of Jack, photos from various stages of his life, and in each one, he was standing beside powerful figures, politicians, businessmen, military leaders. The images were taken in private meetings, behind closed doors, the kind of meetings that were never meant to see the light of day. Barron's stomach turned. Jack wasn't just a war hero. He had been part of something much bigger. The photos suggested a connection to a vast, secretive network, one that had the power to change the course of history. "Who are these people?" Barron asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jack's expression darkened. "Those are the people I've been working against. And now, they know I'm vulnerable. They know someone has made a move to help me, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure I'm silenced." Barron's mind raced. These weren't just powerful people. These were people with the kind of influence that could destroy careers, ruin lives. Barron had never imagined that his simple act of kindness would put him in the crosshairs of such an intricate and dangerous web. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" Barron demanded, his voice edged with frustration. "Why didn't you warn me?" Jack turned to him, his face hardening. "Because I didn't want to get you involved. You're not ready for this world. No one is. But now that you've stepped in, there's no turning back. If you stay, you'll have to fight, and you'll have to fight dirty." Barron swallowed, the reality of what he had gotten himself into crashing down on him. "What do we do now?" Jack stopped walking and turned to face him. "Now, we prepare. We find out who's behind this and who we can trust. But be careful. Anyone could be a target, even the people you think are on your side. Especially the people you think are on your side." Barron's thoughts raced, trying to process everything Jack was saying. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the unknown number. "They're watching. Move carefully." Barron's blood ran cold. He looked around the parking lot, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. The weight of the situation pressed on him. He wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was in the thick of it, and he had no idea who he could trust. "We need to move," Jack said, his voice low, urgent. "They know we're on to them. They'll be making their move soon." Barron followed Jack to the car, the gravity of what had just happened sinking in. The world as he knew it had shifted, and he had no idea what the next few days or even hours would bring. What had started as an act of kindness had now thrust him into a battle that felt too big to win, too dangerous to survive. As they drove off into the night, Barron couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker was waiting just around the corner, something that would test not just his loyalty but his very soul. And deep down, he knew there was no turning back. The drive was silent, each passing mile feeling heavier than the last. Barron stared out of the window, the darkened world outside a reflection of the chaos swirling inside him. The weight of everything that had happened, the veteran's quiet plea for help, the captain's cryptic warning, the mysterious photos, was suffocating. Barron's life had always been carefully structured, predictable. But now, everything had changed. He was on the run, in the middle of something bigger than he could have ever imagined, and there was no clear path out. They arrived at a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, a place so ordinary it could have been any office or warehouse. But Barron knew better than to trust appearances now. Jack led the way inside, and Barron followed, feeling the weight of every step. The interior was stark, bare walls, dim lighting, and a few scattered desks. But Barron's eyes were drawn to the figure sitting in the corner of the room, hunched over a computer. She looked up as they entered, her eyes sharp, calculating. She wasn't surprised to see Barron. In fact, it was almost as if she'd been expecting him. "Barron, meet Clara," Jack said. His tone was firm, but tinged with caution. "She's the one who's been helping me track the people behind this operation, and now she's going to help you." Clara stood up and extended her hand, her grip firm, but her gaze unwavering. "Nice to meet you. I assume Jack's briefed you on what's going on." Barron nodded, though it felt like his mind was still trying to catch up. "I don't understand any of this. Why me? Why am I even involved?" Clara smiled faintly, a hint of respect in her eyes. "Because you made a choice. You helped someone who wasn't just any person. You helped a man who's been making waves in places you don't even know exist. And by doing that, you've become part of a much bigger story." Jack cut in, his voice tense. "We need to move quickly. The people we're up against aren't patient, and if they suspect Barron's involved, they won't hesitate." Barron looked between them, feeling more confused than ever. "So, what do we do now?" Clara sat back down at her desk, pulling up a map on the screen. "Now, we figure out who's behind all of this. We've been tracking them for months, but there are still pieces of the puzzle we don't have. But it won't be easy. These people have resources, power, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Barron looked at the screen, the map now filled with names, locations, and red marks. It was a network of connections, all pointing back to one thing: power. The kind of power that controlled not just money, but lives. And Barron realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about one man's fight. It was about a war, a shadow war, that had been going on for years without anyone knowing. Jack stepped forward, his face hard. "We'll need your help, Barron. You've seen them now. You've seen what they can do. But you also have something they don't: influence. You're a target, but you're also a key player. If we're going to make a move, we need you in this. There's no turning back now." Barron's mind spun. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself. He wasn't prepared for this. But there was something in Jack's eyes, something that pushed him forward. For the first time in his life, Barron felt like he was truly needed, that his actions could make a real difference. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make him take the next step, even if it meant stepping into a battle where the stakes were higher than he could ever have guessed. "What do you need me to do?" Barron asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Clara didn't waste time. "We need to infiltrate their network. We've traced their money, their operations, but we need someone on the inside, someone with the kind of access only you can get. We're going to expose them, Barron. We're going to bring down the people who think they can control the world from the shadows." Barron felt the gravity of the decision settling in his chest. He had never signed up for anything like this. But he couldn't turn back now. He had seen the faces of the people behind the curtain, and he knew that this wasn't just about right and wrong. It was about something much bigger. It was about fighting for the truth, no matter the cost. "I'm in," Barron said, his voice firm, his resolve hardening. Jack nodded, the faintest trace of approval in his eyes. "Good, but remember, Barron, you're no longer just a spectator in this game. You're in the fight now, and it won't be easy. It's going to get messy." Barron met Jack's gaze, understanding the weight of those words. He wasn't a kid anymore, and whatever happened next, it would change him forever. The world outside felt distant now, like a dream that no longer mattered. Barron had made his choice, and there was no going back. He was in the fight, whether he was ready or not, and as the room fell silent, Barron knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let the darkness win, not without a fight.